Greetings, everyone. This is Shecky, and I am super excited. We've got an amazing, very, very special show today titled The Nightmare on LeGrande Street. Now, it's a little bit of a play on words, and I've got a very, very special guest. We've actually given Jack the day off today to bring in a very special friend of mine who's got an absolutely incredible story. And you're going to hear a little bit about his nightmare among some other inspirational stories too. So buckle up. We're in for a really, really great ride. Okay, welcome everybody. And I am here with a really, really amazing buddy of mine. We became buddies actually pretty recently. And he goes by the name of LD Stauffer. And he is also in the real estate industry and has got just some really, really amazing stories and just an incredible background. But I want to welcome you to the show, LD.
Thanks, man. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. This is I can already tell it's going to be my favorite podcast. I mean, usually I do stuff with Jack and, we go back and forth, but it's rare that I get to have somebody who's not only a friend, but somebody who, I consider super successful and that I have a lot of respect for and somebody who's fun and who's got some great stories. So I really, really, really appreciate you joining me and being willing to, share a little bit about your life with us. So tell the audience a little bit about your background, because you've got just this incredible story about, how you were raised. And I mean, I know the whole story, but the listeners don't. And it's just a really, really unique story. So give us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, definitely. So just to start off, you say that Jack's off?
Stop it.
I'm sorry. I was told not to go there, but I couldn't help myself. Right. Jack, I apologize if you're listening to this. But anyway, yeah. So I was raised in between Utah and California.
Yeah.
Not really much California. I just like to claim it because it sounds a little more cool.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of a poser like that. But I have about just under 3 years of former schooling education. My mom wasn't a big fan of the public schooling system. She wasn't the biggest fan. I'm not going to say the biggest fan, but she wasn't the best teacher either. So I was blessed as a young kid to be able to spend most of my time skateboarding and playing with video games and just doing...
So not only not regular public school, but you weren't really homeschooled either.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all, yeah.
Interesting.
I was a little bit behind the curve. I would get together with my peer groups and they would talk about, I don't know, just the stuff you would learn in school, and I always felt so low because I had no idea what they were talking about. They're like, yeah, I learned in math today that 1 and 1 equals 2, and I would look at them like, you mean 11? I was totally off my rocker.
Yeah. So how did you get to a point where you had any sense of how to move through the world?
It's interesting. I think the biggest thing, since my parents had a pretty hands-off approach, I was able to learn by trial and error myself. And usually you have things like helicopter parents who are there, they're making all of your decisions. You grow up and you're not able to make decisions yourself. You feel more comfortable when you have other people in charge, where I was in charge of my own destiny. And it took me a long time. It wasn't until I was about 28 years old where up until that point, I was, a total loser. I had already been married once. I had a kid with my ex-wife. I was on my second marriage. I had a couple more children. We were on food stamps, total welfare, living in a basement apartment. I've told this story before, so if anyone's heard it on another podcast, I apologize. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but so I was just kind of doing my thing, not going anywhere fast.
Yeah, but how did you go and get to that point of, it sounds like, I hate to use the P word, like poverty, but how do you get down to that point? Were you raised in a poor family? Were you to me, for example, I think a lot of people, it's the amount of money that you have is very rarely connected to your education. and it's almost always connected to your mindset about money. So were you raised with like a scarcity mindset, or how did you get to that point?
That's a good question. I can't say I come from a middle lower class family. So we weren't in poverty, My dad was self-employed. He was a general contractor. There was a time where we were living in a trailer at one point. We had a nice house at another point. I'm going to say the family that I had and the wealth that I had is pretty average for an average American family. But since I hadn't gone to school, as soon as I got to that point where I had to go out and get a job, no one was going to hire me because I didn't have a high school education. So it was...
So you don't even have like what they would call a GED.
A GED.
A GED. You don't even have one of those.
I actually... That's a funny story. I mean, that's a whole story in itself. But I actually, when I was in 12th grade, that's the last grade in high school, correct?
It is in the U.S.
Okay, yeah. So I was in California. I guess it was 12th grade, and I was 18 years old. And I said, Mom, Dad, I want to go to school. I'm going to go to high school. I want to graduate. They said, sure, fine. You're an adult. Do whatever you want. So I went to this school, and I met with the guidance counselor and the principal, and I'm like, I'm ready to go to school. And they said, that's great. We just need to look up your transcripts. And then I started getting nervous. And the lady looks up at me, and then she looks at her computer, and she's like, you don't have any transcripts. I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. She goes, what school did you go to? I'm like, I don't know, whatever, I guess. So she said, if you want to go to school here, you have to start from 9th grade, and you need to go through the whole entire thing. And I said, screw that. I wanted to come, and I want to meet some girls and have some fun. I'm not going to the 9th grade and doing all this stuff. So they said, you could go take your GED. I said, that's a great idea. So I took GED prep for about a week or 2 weeks, and I went to the GED testing center, and I sat down, and I don't know if you've seen that movie, what is it called? It's like Back to School or High School Vacation or something like that. It's where this guy, he gets like an A on exam or a passing grade, and you see him as he's taking his test, he's going C, 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 C. And so I was doing the same thing. I was just going like hitting all the C's.
Picking all the same thing on the multiple choice.
Yeah. And then I was like, this isn't going to work. This is going to be so bad. So I started like looking over my shoulder, and I started copying everyone else's answer. And it wasn't until after the test was taken I realized that they were all different tests. So I was like cheating, and I was getting the wrong ones. And somehow I passed. And it was in the lowest percentile, but I read it wrong. And I was like, whoa, look, I'm like in this percentile all by myself. I must be a genius. But I just, so...
All right, so you got your GED. GED. I can't even say it. Yeah. So what was it that became then, a turning point for you as to how you went from, really no education and food stamps, welfare, all that? Like, how does a guy like you without any kind of education pull himself out of that?
It's so simple that people wouldn't really believe it, but I mean, it comes down to mindset. I didn't have that mindset. I had that scarcity mentality where, I'd get the food stamps and I'd try to squeeze every last penny because maybe they were going to take it away the next month. And one day I was reading a book by Napoleon Hill, and once you get into a different arena where you're meeting with successful people, your peer groups are these types of people, everyone understands and knows about this book. I had no idea, so I picked it up for the first time. Excuse me. I'm dying over here.
Yeah, you're talking about Think and Grow Rich, I'm assuming.
Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah, classic. You okay?
Yeah, maybe you can edit that out. I don't know.
Whatever.
And I read that book, and it clicked for the first time. And I realized that I could be whatever I wanted to be. And I was starting kind of from a clean slate because, number one, with my education or lack of education, no one was going to hire me unless it was for a minimum wage paid job, which I'd had up until that point. So I didn't really have anything to lose. And I read the book and realized I could do whatever I wanted. I could be whatever I wanted. And I remember I was writing my journal after I read that book, and I said, I'm going to make my first 6-figure income by the end of this year. and there was about 6 months left in the year, and I'll tell you what, I made that.
Awesome. Love it.
It's interesting. I mean, that's a whole story in itself, but I mean, and now I'm here with you.
Well, there's a few little gaps we got to fill in there just for our listeners. But so where did you go from that standpoint? What was the next step after you read this book and you get this 6-figure income? What is it that you did? How did things change? What kind of business did you go into? I mean, in a way, I kind of see an irony in that when you have no education and nobody's going to hire you, it's almost like you're forced into being an entrepreneur. It's different than the guy that got born having all the education and becoming a professional or whatever and sort of having an understanding that this is going to be his lot in life. All right? You're almost in a spot where you don't really have a choice. You pretty much have to work for yourself. Otherwise, you're never going to make ends meet. Yeah,
and I think that's the difference between me and most people, where they get complacent, and I couldn't be complacent. I mean, food stamps don't keep coming forever. The HEAT program and all these different government assistance programs I was on, I wasn't going to get them forever, so I had to do something. And since I wasn't going to be able to make money working from someone, and after reading that book, I realized, hey, I'm going to go. I had a job. I was making minimum wage. I was working for a healthcare provider, and they fired me. And so around that point, I read that book, and I said, hey, I'll just start my own healthcare provider.
Because it was pretty much all you knew.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it blew up today. I'm not exactly sure, maybe 40 to 60 full-time employees that work for that company, but it's something that I had no business being in.
But you still pulled it off.
I pulled it off. And the reason I pulled it off is just because I decided I was going to do it. And I mean, these people that are listening, if you have an education, you could do it a lot easier than I did if you put your mind to it.
Yeah. So what happened after that? Like now you got 40 to 60 employees. Like, is your mind just like blown at this point? You got this incredible income. Like, how did things change for you?
Well, so I still, even to this day, and I'm trying to get over it, I still have that scarcity mindset that's ingrained inside of me. And so after that company got going, and it was stressful, I'm not going to lie, it was really hard. I mean, dealing with it, the whole company is funded by the government through Social Security, through Medicaid, very difficult to be in. A lot of stressful, sleepless nights. So I still own the company, but I was able to replace myself, and I invented or designed a weight loss device, and that was just, I had this forward momentum, and I said, I don't ever want to go back to poverty. I don't know how long my company, my healthcare provider, is going to be around, so I designed the weight loss device, and now that company sells it internationally, and so that was the next step.
Yeah, fantastic. Do you want to tell us what the name of the weight loss device is?
It's I'm actually I was sued by a company called Cool Sculpting. I don't know if I should say that on the podcast, but I actually paid my last installment yesterday. It was broken up over a year, right. But I gave them $4,500 yesterday.
Okay.
I'm finally free.
The last payment.
Because I call myself Cool Sculpting at home.
Okay.
but they didn't like that, so it's fatfreesystem.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Very cool.
Or Blue International. I don't really mess with the company right now. I'm not exactly sure what we call it nowadays. I have people that kind of run it for me.
Right.
Make up weird decisions. I don't know.
Yeah. So obviously that's just more obstacles that you've been able to overcome. So how did you go from that? Because you and I met as a result of real estate, and we got introduced by somebody else in the turnkey business, and I'm just curious how you go from that, because at this time you're living in Salt Lake City, and now we're both in the studio in Indianapolis, and like, how do you go just pick up and end up in Indianapolis doing real estate? I mean, it seems pretty random. I mean, you're in some like government funded healthcare thing, and you go from there to like some weight loss device that you're selling on the internet. How do you go from that to like real estate?
It was a long journey, and I guess I kind of fell into it. I retired last year, and I spent most of the year traveling through South America with my wife and my kids.
Nice.
Oh, it was so much fun. I'm ready to go back. The problem is my wife, after 6 or so months, she was done. She was like, I want to go back to the States. I'm done with this. Because I'd put her in a nice condo on the beach, and then I would disappear for 2 months at a time. You know, like taking trips through the Amazon, sleeping in hostels and on buses and in the jungle and stuff like that. I was having a blast. My wife wasn't having any of it. Yeah. So she said, we're going back to the States right now. And I'm like, I don't want to go back to the States. It's so stressful there. And so it's been about, what month is it right now? We're in April.
Beginning of April.
We came back last year, end of October. She wanted to be here for Halloween. November, I came to my wife. I was like, I have an idea. I'm going to become a real estate investor. So I just hopped in my car and drove out to Indianapolis.
You just got in your car and drove?
I just got in my car. Well, it took about 2 days, you know.
Yeah, well, it's not
I
a
had
short
to tell my
drive.
wife. I'm like, well, I mean, I had to explain to my wife for 2 days. Like, this is what I'm going to do. Like, I wasn't able to say, I'm going to Indianapolis. I'll see you later. I had to convince her for a few hours.
Right.
And then I had to, you know, fill up the tank of gas and get, like, my bed roll and stuff like that. So that took 2 days. And I hopped in my car. Indianapolis, I don't know.
Well, like, so why real estate? Why Indy? Like, what was it that caused you to just say, okay, I'm just going to go into real estate and I'm going to go to Indy?
Okay, well, I'll start off with why real estate.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not an educated person, but I'll tell you what, if you want to be successful, if you want to make money, if you want to be rich, it's in real estate. I mean, I've done other things, and I guess I've been lucky, but...
Well, I wouldn't say it's luck. I mean, dude, you've worked your ass off.
The harder I work, the luckier I become.
Right, so that's a very common expression, and I agree with it.
But real estate, you don't have to be a genius to become successful in real estate. And you can become very successful if you're able to delay a little bit of gratification where you make money. Instead of blowing it, you reinvest it into your real estate. You can build a portfolio that can then compound on itself, and that's where the real money or the real success, and not only success, but with my other companies, I've been sued so many times. I'm being audited by the government. There's not a lot of stability in there. But in real estate, I apologize.
Yeah, no worries.
But in real estate, there's stability. And so that's, you're putting a note where you can cut it. But in real estate, there's stability. And if you want to have stability in your life, that's where you want to go, and that's why I chose real estate.
Yeah, that's cool. So why Indy? I mean, like, you what when you said, okay, I'm going to go into real estate, you've obviously been, you know, reading books. I'm assuming a guy like you doesn't read Think and Grow Rich and stop there.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I know you to be a guy that likes to consume a lot of information and books and podcasts and things like that. What were the things that you were reading and looking at that led you to real estate, and then why Indy? So tell me the first part first.
Okay, to be completely honest, I didn't really read anything on real estate up until this point. It's just a general observation that I've always seen, that successful people are in real estate. And so I just decided that's where I want to go, that's where I want to be. Indianapolis, the reason I came out here is it's one of the only places that I know in the country that you can buy a single family home for such a good price in a economy that is actually growing.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go to California and you can buy houses for, you know, $1 million, and it's just a shack, and it's not even by the beach. Where I was at in Utah, you can go to the hood or the ghetto and you could buy a door for $200,000 to $250,000. Out here in Indianapolis, you can get homes from turnkey providers that are ready and set up, ready to go for around $50,000.
Yeah.
And so my money was going to go a lot further out here. And heaven forbid something happens, the whole entire place burns down, or I do it completely wrong. I'm out so much less than if I went to anywhere else in the country. There's places you can go in the Midwest where I'm sure you can get stuff for even cheaper, but they're in declining areas. And you'll buy that, and 10 years from now, it's not going to be worth anything, and you're not even going to be able to sell it. Here in Indianapolis, if you buy a home for 50, 10 years from now, I don't know, you might be sitting on a gold mine.
Yeah, we don't know. Nobody's got a crystal ball, but you bring up a really good point about, growth, and, there's some really cool stuff happening in Indy, and it's fun to be here and experience it, because the city is definitely going through, some sort of renaissance, I guess we could say.
Yeah.
And in our game, in the turnkey game, our play is really cash flow. We're not necessarily looking hard at appreciation numbers, but I agree with you. I believe that we're going to see the benefits of that as well. It's just not necessarily something we're focused on. It's just something that's pleasant to have that happening in the background.
The icing on the cake.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. So what have you been doing with real estate? Like, what part of the business are you in? What is it that you're learning? What's intriguing to you? What's working? What's not working?
I mean, that's a good question. I hit the wall running every single day because this is a completely new field to me.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of things wrong. I think I've done a couple things right. But I mean, it's a numbers game, Eventually I'll get it right. But right now, I came out here and I was actually sleeping in my car. I said, I'm not going to sleep in a hotel. I'm taking away all my comforts because I have to buy a house. I've got to get going. And the biggest obstacle, I tell you, Shecky, the biggest obstacle in real estate is getting that first deal.
Yeah.
And it's not hard to get that first deal. The thing that's hard about that first deal is that mental block.
Yeah.
And people will study and they'll read about it for years, and they'll want to do it, and they'll talk about it, and then they'll just paralysis by analysis, and they'll never get into it. And I know I can do that exact same thing, so I made it so it was kind of you're damned if you do, or you're damned if you don't, but you're okay if you do.
Yeah, but you're sleeping in a car in the Midwest in the winter.
Oh, it was cold, man.
This is not like summertime. You don't have the windows down. Like, it gets cold here in the winter.
It is so damn cold. I would look at the temperature and it said like 45 degrees. I go, oh, that's great. That's t-shirt and flip-flop weather. I would stand out. It chills to the bone.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's crazy. But that obviously, supposedly, to be punny, lit a fire under your ass to get out there and make that first deal happen, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Right. So what did that look like? Like when you jumped in, tell us a little bit about your first deal.
All right. Well, the name of this episode is Nightmare on LeGrande Street.
Yeah, and by the way, for listeners, no offense to Ron LeGrande if you're listening. Ron LeGrande is a very famous real estate trainer who I've actually met a couple of times back in the days, previous days. But this just FYI, if you're listening, Ron, this has got nothing to do with you. This is actually a street in Indianapolis named LeGrande Street.
My first deal, actually. I mean, I love the house. It's beautiful. I got it for a decent price. It's fully rented. But I'll tell you what, I made every mistake in the book. There was one point towards the end of this deal that I was sleeping with a 9mm Glock underneath my pillow because I thought I was going to get not robbed, but kidnapped and held for ransom from my employees or my workers.
Right, they thought they saw you as the guy with the money.
Yeah, basically. I talk a lot. I have a big mouth. I don't shut up. I get excited. I want to tell. I don't want to brag about anything, but I want to tell everyone, oh, you can be so successful. I did it. You can do it too. Look, right. If you do this is what I did. And I had some questionable people. I mean, they were all excited and they were fun in the beginning. At one point, I was with one of my workers and he says, oh, LD, I'm feeling so sick, man. Can you take me home? I go, oh yeah, I gotta take you home. So we hop in my old beat up car, and I start driving to his house. He's like, no, turn left here. And I go, okay. Turn right here. And so I turn right, and we pull up to this house. He's like, right here. And I go, well, this isn't your house. And he says, just wait on one sec. So he runs behind this house. He comes back to the car, and he looks at me. He goes, I took a NyQuil, man. Or a NyQuil or something. He's like, I feel good. I'm ready to go back to work. And
So he got what he needed. He's ready to go back to work.
Yeah. It may look like I was born yesterday, but I knew something was totally off.
Yeah.
So we get back to the house, and he goes, I gotta go to the bathroom. And I'm like, oh, yeah, so I pull up really quick, thinking he's gonna crap his pants in my car. He runs in the bathroom. He's in there for 30 minutes, comes out, high as a kite. He was in there shooting up heroin.
Oh, my God.
And so, yeah, and I mean, that wasn't the first time, and I didn't know what to, I'm gonna fire you for doing heroin, but we were just at a drug dealer's house. I don't want to get involved in this stuff. And things just slowly went downhill from there. I actually started feeling really uncomfortable, really unsafe around this guy, to the point where I went and I bought a gun.
Yeah.
And I was concealing it in my pants, and I wanted him to see it by accident. Right. I used the air quotes.
Yeah.
So when he saw the gun, I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for you to see that. And he goes, that's awesome, dude. Check this out. And he pulls out of his pocket a .45. And this guy's a convicted felon. And I got this gun because I started getting scared something was going to happen. What is this guy doing coming to the job site, a convicted felon with a gun?
Yeah, so these are the joys of doing rehabs.
These are the joys of doing rehabs. I mean, you think I would learn my lesson, and slowly I'm learning my lesson. There is a better way. There is a lot of different ways, a lot of better ways, but I'm a little bit slow, so I've hit my head on a couple of these projects.
Well, it's interesting because you and I met through, basically kind of in the world of turnkey.
Uh-huh.
And, I'm like the kind of guy that's like, I just want to buy something that's done and rented and turnkey, and as do probably most of the listeners of this show. But I know you and I have talked about this. You want to do that, but there's something in your personality that's not letting you do that. Like, you're this guy that's kind of got to deconstruct everything. You got to get in there and figure out how every little moving piece and part works, right? So you can fully understand it, which is great. I mean, it's an admirable quality, but it's just like when I hear stories like that, like I don't ever want to do another rehab. Ever. It's like I just and you've lived through that nightmare on LeGrande Street, but I mean, that was your first deal and you didn't know any better. And I know that, as you're moving on now, things are getting a little bit smoother for you. But, you and I were talking also about leverage, and just from a standpoint of being successful and taking your time and learning how to have other people, how to replicate yourself, right? And so tell us how that's working out, and like, what are you doing now to make that happen?
Well, that's a really good question.
I thought so.
I don't know what I'm doing right now to make it happen. Yeah, I'm doing the same things. Who is it? I can't even think of his name. Einstein? Is he the one that said the meaning of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results?
Yes, that's Einstein.
I'm tweaking the results. And the idea is to come out here and build a team. Number one, because I have the time to do it. I have the money. And I like building things. Yeah. And so that's the idea. That's what I'm trying to do out here, is build with my portfolio. And as I was talking a little earlier in the podcast, with real estate, that's where there's so much wealth to be had, and there's so many different ways to do it. I want to get in there. I want to know and understand how the whole thing works, so I can see it through from A to Z and feel comfortable to pass it on to somebody else, because I know exactly how it's supposed to be done, and people aren't going to say, oh yeah, the whole thing's broken, you're going to need a new flux capacitor lithium crystal, and that'll be $12,000. And oh yeah, here you go. Now I know that's just, something from Back to the Future.
Right.
But I had to get my hands dirty so I can be able to do this.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. So will there come a day, I'm hoping, that you won't be in so much in the trenches? I mean, like, is the goal there to leverage, like, where do you want to take your company? Like, what you talk about, sort of leveraging stuff. Like, how are you going to go from here to where you want to be, and exactly where do you want to be? Because you're talking about wealth building and leverage, and you're throwing these terms around, but what does that look like for your company?
Okay. Hopefully I'm going to answer the question. What I'm trying to do is get to critical mass. We're out here in the Midwest because homes, they're a good value. I don't want to use the word cheap, but they're fairly inexpensive.
For sure.
And the ROI is completely over the roof. I mean, it's not unheard of to get 20+% ROI on your money. Now, I don't want to say that. I mean, I don't know.
No, we've sold some properties that that have done that and can do that if they stay fully rented.
Yeah.
It's the high end, but it's certainly possible.
Yeah. And so that being said, being able to go out and buy a few of these properties, and as that money comes in, not spend it, let it build up to the point where I can buy another one. And then now you've got 3 of them. The money's coming in 3 times as fast. I can buy a fourth one 3 times as fast, and just keep doing that, snowballing it. And the idea is over the next 2 years to reach that critical mass to where my properties are bringing in enough money that I can afford to buy at least one a month and afford to have it rehabbed and afford to pay a project manager to oversee the whole entire operation, and then I can leave and move on to the next thing, which is probably traveling somewhere with my backpack in a third world country.
Does your wife know about this?
Yeah. I hope she's not listening to the podcast.
Okay.
It
sounds good. I kind of want to go with you. That sounds great, but that's awesome. Like to have that vision of self-perpetuation of a business that does this, and you're honestly, dude, I got to tell you, it's inspiring because you've done it with 2 other businesses, and now you're doing it in the real estate business, and you bring up a very, very good point that, to an extent, I think is almost anti-American. And here's kind of what I mean. We live in a society in the U.S. that especially is about flashy and showy and spend and, who's got the latest gadget and all that other kind of stuff. And you're a guy who's making plenty of cash from your other 2 businesses. And every time I see you, you're driving the old beat up, what we call the race car, and wearing flip-flops, right? And you're taking all that money and you're dumping it into other properties, and you're building yet another one that's dumping it. I mean, it's admirable how humbly you live, and to take that money and not be what's the word I'm looking for, swayed or lured by all the fancy shiny objects that are out there that I know you can afford to buy. It's just interesting, and I think that takes a certain mindset and a certain discipline, and to have that discipline is probably the greatest discipline that a real estate investor could have, is to say, how could I maybe not spend on something right now for the sake of having just this incredible future, of having just, complete financial freedom, and having a situation where I don't have to worry about anything. My family is taken care of, my heirs, all that stuff. So that said, I'm kind of curious, like, what would you tell the listeners how to get into that mindset? Like, what's the motivation for you behind that? Like, how do you really not get swayed by all that? And what is it that's so strong, like your why, that gets you into that groove like that?
Well, I'll answer that kind of in 2 parts. And one of the first things, I think one of the biggest keys to building wealth and to being successful is the ability to delay gratification.
Agreed.
Now, most people, when they get a raise from their job, they buy a new car. They get another raise, they buy another car. They get a bigger house. And they get stuck in this rat wheel or the rat race where they're just going around and around and around and they can't get out of it. They become slaves to their jobs. They become doctors that are making $200,000 a year and they're a couple months away from bankruptcy, where they get sick, they lose their job. Then a couple months later, here comes the repo man to the boat. Here comes the repo man to the BMW. Here comes the foreclosure notice for the lake cabin.
Yeah.
And these people will never be able to enjoy their lives because they are working to sustain a lifestyle that is not making them happy. Who loves to have to get up every morning and have to go to work? Because if you don't, you will lose what you have.
Right.
If you're able to understand, I don't need all that stuff to be happy. What makes me happy is time. Money is replenishable. Time is not replenishable. That's why I think real estate is such a good option, because you can build a portfolio, or you could get a couple houses and you can go to sleep. And while you're sleeping in the middle of the afternoon, the people that are renting the house are at work. They're working to be able to pay you so they can stay in a nice, beautiful home that you have provided them. And if you have enough of these houses and you're not buying all these flashy things, guess what? You don't have to wake up in the morning to go to work. You can wake up in the morning and say, what do I want to do today? And if you're somewhat of a productive person, go out and build things, travel, have some fun, enjoy life, enjoy your family, enjoy your wife and kids while they're young, or enjoy your grandchildren. Those are the things you can do by getting into real estate and not buying all the shiny shit, pardon my French, that people feel like they have to have. It's not making you happy. It can't make you happy. I have no interest in that stuff because I value my time. Now, there was another part of your question and I completely have no idea what it is. I'm just talking and going off on a rant.
No, dude, I think it's great. I mean, you bring up a good point. Just to sort of recap what you said, one of the things you talked about is people just being broke at a higher level. Mm-hmm. And being a slave to the things, and you start getting into really touched on really just probably a more spiritual conversation about, what is it that creates happiness, and it's really not things that creates happiness. It's experiences. Mm-hmm. And you use the word time, but it's hard to have and create experiences if you don't have the time and you don't have the money to be able to create those experiences. And obviously some things are inexpensive, like time with family and that sort of stuff, or you obviously can't put a price on that. So mm-hmm. I think it's great. I mean, I love what you said. I think it's fantastic. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I just have to tell you, this is kind of funny. This is a little bit embarrassing. It's my Lamborghini story.
I love it. Let's hear it.
So I drive a 2002 Honda Civic, which we lovingly call the race car.
The race car. I love the race car.
It goes so damn fast that all of the paint is peeling off the hood. And
that's how that happened.
Exactly.
Okay,
and the smoke
sure.
coming out and the fire from the hood, that's speed smoke. So that's why it's a race car.
Thank you for clarifying.
My wife hates it.
Yeah.
She despises it. She gets so embarrassed. I tell you what, I feel like I'm getting profiled. I've been pulled over by cops before, and they give me the weirdest look. They look in my back seat. Oh, pop the trunk. They're looking for drugs. They think I'm some crazy guy, and I look homeless as well. Wearing my dirty clothes, whatever. But so this one day I came to my wife and I said, sweetheart, I've been working really hard. We've built up some wealth. I think I'm going to use the naughty word entitlement, but I feel like I'm entitled to buying like maybe a 2 or 3 year old Toyota Corolla. And my wife, she just lights up. Yeah, you should go and buy one. I go, all right, I'm going to do that. So I started looking, and they're pretty expensive. And I go, well, for, X amount more, I could buy a Hummer too. So I go to my wife and I go, hey babe, can I buy a Hummer too? Oh yeah, definitely, you deserve it. You know, she's just seeing like cha-ching, cha-ching. My husband is not going to be looking like he's homeless anymore. And she's from Brazil, so she's really into, you know, looking beautiful, and we have nice things. And I just drive her crazy all the time. So she's thinking, this is golden ticket. Our life's going to change. We're not going to be the homeless family anymore. And so as I'm looking at these Hummers, I realize for a little bit more, on the used end, I can buy a Lamborghini. So I go to my wife and I say, hey babe, can I get this Lamborghini? And oh, sure, you can get a Lamborghini. So I start looking at Lamborghinis, and I get my car and I drive to the Lamborghini dealership. I'm like,
in the race car.
In my race car.
Love it.
And I don't actually pull into the parking lot. As I get close, I stop and I look over my hood and I see like my car is just, it's awful looking, and the headliner is falling down on my head, and I look like I'm homeless, and I'm like, I'm gonna go in there and they're gonna make fun of me. They're not gonna believe me. They're not gonna believe I can buy this car. So I drive around a couple times trying to get up enough courage to go in and buy this Lamborghini. And as I loop one more time, I just stop and I look at my car. I get out and I'm like, what the hell am I doing? You know, and so I like pat my car on the hood and I'm like, I'm sorry, babe, I'm never going to do this again. So I got in my car and I went home.
So you never even went into the dealership?
Never went into the dealership. But the reason I tell you this story is because earlier I explained how I spent most of last year traveling through South America in Brazil. Loved it. If I had a Lamborghini sitting at home in my driveway, I don't have, actually the street, I don't have a parking lot or a garage. It would be parked on the street. How am I going to enjoy myself when I'm thinking, oh, the snowplow is going to ding it. People might scratch it.
Yeah.
Like it's getting rained on. It's a thing. It's a damn car. It's too much of my energy that I would have to waste on crap. And that's why I tell you the story, because that would not have made me happy. That would have made me miserable.
Well, kudos for you for recognizing that. You know, like I said, I think it's, you know, a lot of the way you're talking, at least as far as the way most Americans or most first world countries, or obviously even Brazilians too, they're all about, you know, the flash and the cash and all that other kind of stuff and the nice things. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with nice things.
Oh, not at all.
I think that there are some great quality products that make life better, and that's great. But you bring up a good point just about being not attached to things in such a way that they are the cause of happiness, because really our happiness is, like I said, it's coming from experiences, and it's just coming from being grateful for the things that we have, right? So I want to just shift gears for a minute, because we're really almost out of time, and this has been great and it's gone really fast. But I really want to ask, you know, it's sort of just to tie it all together, from a guy who starts with a life-changing moment of reading Think and Grow Rich, you know, the classic by Napoleon Hill. What are some of the books, podcasts, things that have really influenced you and helped you kind of shift, you know, because I mean, like, you're a guy that basically comes from food stamps and poverty and zero education, and like, you know, from nothing into, you know, 3 successful businesses and travel around the world, and, you know, of course, owning that 2002 Honda Civic race car, and, you know, but like, what are some of the things that have really helped to influence you and guide you, whether those are podcasts or books or other people or...
I'm sure that a lot of the listeners, maybe not a lot of them, but there's the quote that you're the average of your 5 closest friends.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't have a ton of really successful people, but reading books, I've brainwashed myself by listening to podcasts and reading books that I feel like these are my peers, the people that I read and the people that I listen to, and that's kind of what I've been able to do. As for the ones that have really helped, Think and Grow Rich, obviously. Another one that is really good, is a classic, is How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah, Dale Carnegie.
Yeah, wonderful book. I mean, the things that I mention are the things that people always mention. They're the classics, and they're classics for reasons. It's because they teach principles that are truthful and they're easy to understand, and anybody can do it. It's just putting your mind to it. Another great podcast that I like listening to is going to be the Timothy Ferriss podcast.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah. Talk about titans of today's industry, the people that he interviews on his podcast on a weekly basis. Excuse me again, are those people that are titans in the world. They're changing industries, and so that's a great one as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. But you're like a podcast freak.
I know.
Like you go on these main lines, and you'll download and you'll listen to 10 or 12 of them in a day.
I know.
Right?
I've got nothing better to do.
Well, I don't know if that's the
Except
case,
for,
but you're maximizing your time, which is great. It's just leverage. So I guess the final question would be typically the people that listen to this podcast for the most part are seasoned investors. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are people that are not necessarily first-time investors, although there are some first-timers too. But for the person out there that's got 2, 3, 4 properties and want to leverage up and really build something big, what would you say is the best advice that you could give them?
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot.
Of course, that's my job.
I thought you were going to say, is there anything that you want to say to these people? And I was going to say, yeah, give me a call and tell me how to do it. So, yeah, I mean,
look, dude, let me rephrase it or reframe it, right? So, you're a guy who's built systems. Mm-hmm. You were in the healthcare business when you were just a low-end employee. And you developed another product in the weight loss industry and built that up, right? But both of those businesses and the business that you're ramping up now, your real estate business, you're building some systemized structures to allow those things to self-perpetuate, mm-hmm. right? So here's what I'm saying is, for the average, well, the people that listen to this podcast mm-hmm. are not average, but for the typical investor mm-hmm. that's out there, maybe they are a doctor, maybe they have a busy job, mm-hmm. right? And they've got 2 or 3 properties, but they want to leverage their way up to 8 or 10 or 15 or 20 and build a portfolio. What's the best advice that you could give them from a standpoint of systemizing? What's your best tip or trick for doing that to leverage your way up that way? Because we've all only got 24 hours in a day, mm-hmm. right? Some people seem like yourself to be those kinds of people that just obviously know how to squeeze every drop out of that, and others just don't. Mm-hmm. So what advice would you give people in that environment?
Oh, I mean, you didn't pay me or anything, but hopefully you'll slide me the $20 after this is over. But really, when it comes down to it, it's going to be getting a property from a turnkey provider that you can trust. Okay. And I've worked with you for a while, a very honest guy. I know you love helping people, and I couldn't recommend you enough. I mean, if you want to do what I'm doing and you have all the time in the world and you've got some good guns or guard dogs, come out and do exactly what I'm doing. It's fun. There's an adrenaline rush to be had, but if you've got a job and you want to grow it and systematize it, get with a good turnkey provider and let them do it for you. Because I'm trying to systemize this. I don't know how to do it, to be completely honest. I've done these things before, but every day I get up and I look at myself. I'm like, dude, you were a fraud. Like, I just keep getting lucky, I guess. But
you're chipping away at it.
I'm chipping away at it every day. But yeah, that's my advice: is find someone you can trust that knows what they're doing, that does this for a living, and can take it off of your hands. Or If you want, throw your money in a mutual fund and watch it ride the waves of insanity and uncertainty, or throw in a money market account, and you can get, I've heard of people getting at least 2% annually. I mean, that's great.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
no, and
those are the options.
I appreciate the plug. I'm sure Jack does too, as do all of us in the turnkey business. But I want to say thank you, and like I said, it's a pleasure having you here. It's joyful for me to ride in the race car. It's joyful for me to have the adrenaline rush of seeing properties like the Nightmare on LeGrande Street. And I'm appreciative of you, and I'm thrilled to be able to call you a friend. And I appreciate the time you took to come on and share your insights, and for coming to the studio today. And I got a lot out of it, and I'm sure the listeners did too. So thanks, brother. Really, really appreciate you. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks. The pleasure is all mine.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time.